Some people live behind curtains of performance. Everything about them, smiles, words, promises, is rehearsed to maintain illusion. For a long time, those illusions worked. They painted themselves as victims, saints, or misunderstood souls while feeding off the energy of anyone who believed them. It looked harmless, even charming, until truth appeared, not through accusation but observation. A small detail, a contradiction, a repeated habit, it all began to connect. The mask didn't fall, it cracked. When illusion meets awareness, the performance ends. That's what happened. You stopped hearing what was said and started watching what was done. The shift was silent, yet irreversible. You didn't expose them with anger, but with clarity. And clarity, once seen, cannot be unseen. That's what scarred them. The realization that the person they could manipulate now holds the mirror steady, reflecting everything they work to hide. Exposure isn't always public. Sometimes it happens in private moments when patterns collapse under their own weight. The truth didn't need to be shouted, it was visible in silence. You saw how every story twisted to make them blameless, how every apology came with justification, how empathy always flowed one way. The beauty of awareness is that it doesn't fight, it reveals. You didn't plan revenge, you simply stopped participating in their narrative. That absence of validation was louder than confrontation. Their game required your confusion, and once it disappeared, so did their control. That's when the panic set in. They began to realize that truth had no weakness to exploit. You didn't attack them. You let their actions expose them. Reality did the work for you. The scar they carry now isn't from your hand, but from their reflection. Truth cuts deepest when spoken through behavior. Some people spend their lives avoiding mirrors, not physical ones, the kind that force them to face their motives. They rehearse lies until they sound like facts, build identities out of sympathy, and decorate manipulation with charm. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, it slips through tone, timing, or contradiction. What you did was simple. You noticed. You paid attention to inconsistencies most ignore. That awareness became your rebellion. You didn't shout their secrets into the world. You just stopped pretending not to see. That's when illusion shattered. The truth burns differently when it's met with composure. You became untouchable because you didn't need to prove anything. You stopped reacting, and that silence made them crumble. The exposure wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. You removed the fantasy from their reality, and once the spotlight of perception dimmed, they were left standing in the dark they created. Every manipulator fears the same thing: recognition. Their power doesn't come from strength, but from confusion. Once someone sees through the pattern, the entire structure falls apart. It's like watching a magician repeat the same trick. After you've learned the mechanism, the illusion no longer works. That's what your awareness did. It dismantled their confidence. Their charm turned hollow, their stories predictable, their tactics ineffective. The truth didn't destroy them, it disarmed them. And what's worse for someone built on lies than losing their audience? You didn't need to expose them publicly because their behavior did it repeatedly. The shift was psychological. The person they once controlled now watched with steady eyes. That's what broke them. When exposure comes from stillness, not rage, it creates a wound pride cannot heal. You didn't ruin their image, they did. You just refused to keep protecting it. Silence can be the loudest form of exposure. You learned that restraint terrifies the deceptive more than accusation ever could. They were prepared for confrontation, ready to twist words and cry victimhood. But they were not prepared for indifference. Indifference stripped them of control. Every manipulator thrives on emotional access, and once that door closed, panic set in. The reality they avoided came flooding in because your silence removed the distraction of denial. The truth stood in front of them, uncloaked, raw, undeniable. Exposure hurts most when it's self-inflicted, when the person realizes they've been the architect of their own downfall. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was precision. You allowed them to witness their own undoing, to feel the collapse of their performance. That's why they look haunted now, because truth doesn't echo, it lingers, and once seen, it follows. The scar you left wasn't from cruelty, it was from clarity. Truth doesn't wound the innocent, it only burns the dishonest. When deception loses its mask, Shame fills the space where control once lived. They'll never admit it, but they replay every moment in their mind, searching for the instant they lost their grip. The irony is, it wasn't one moment. It was gradual. Every time you stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped excusing, the structure weakened. Awareness became the quiet hammer that broke their illusion. You didn't need power to expose them, you just needed patience. That's what people underestimate. How dangerous patience can be in the hands of someone observant. You waited, watched, and allowed truth to accumulate until it spoke for itself. Exposure doesn't always mean chaos. Sometimes it's a calm unveiling, and calm unnerves the deceitful more than any rage ever could. When truth surfaces, it creates distance, not just emotional, but energetic. You stopped resonating with their chaos, and energy doesn't lie. People who live in deception feel exposed in the presence of someone aligned with truth. That's why they avoid your gaze now. It's not fear of judgment, it's recognition of contrast. They feel small around authenticity, because lies only survive where confusion exists. You became the light they can't control, the kind that reveals without effort. The scar they carry is internal. Every manipulation, every false word, now echoes in their conscience. That's the thing about awareness. It doesn't need revenge to feel satisfied. Truth itself becomes consequence. You learn that power isn't in proving who's right, it's in letting time show who's real. The more aligned you became, the less room deception had to breathe. Exposure wasn't an act, it was an evolution. The hardest part of awakening is realizing how long you defended the illusion. You once called their behavior misunderstanding, their control love, their lies confusion. Awareness turned all of that upside down. Suddenly, the things that used to make you question yourself now looked absurd. You saw the manipulation from the outside for the first time, and it was ugly. But what came after was liberation. You stopped explaining pain to those who caused it. You stopped needing closure from people who created the wound. That detachment felt like power because it was. They expected confrontation. Instead, you gave distance. That distance exposed everything they tried to hide. The facade needed your participation to survive, and once you withdrew, it collapsed. Their dark reality was never truly hidden. It was sustained through your empathy. When you finally chose self-respect over understanding, illusion ceased to exist. The truth has a way of echoing through silence. You didn't need to tell anyone what you saw. The world figured it out through the imbalance in behavior. When someone built on deceit loses control, they unravel publicly without realizing it. Their words grow defensive, their stories inconsistent, their actions desperate. That's what exposure looks like when it's divine. It unfolds naturally. You just had to stand still and let the truth reveal itself. The scar they carry now is internal, but it shows in the way they avoid you. Awareness feels like danger to the deceitful. It's not your fault they fell apart. It's the cost of living dishonestly. Truth doesn't destroy people, it simply removes what never belonged. And now, the reflection they see haunts them, not because of what you did, but because of what you stopped allowing. That's how exposure works. Quiet, permanent, undeniable. Deception thrives where self-doubt lives. As long as a person doesn't understand who they are, they will keep falling for stories written by others. The manipulator's power isn't in their words, it's in your uncertainty. The moment you start understanding your patterns, the game ends. You begin to see how every lie that hurt you once found a home inside a part of you that wanted to believe. That's the brutal truth. Deception can't enter without permission. Awareness of your own wounds, fears, and desires makes you immune. Once you start knowing what drives your emotions, you stop being predictable. The manipulator's rhythm loses tempo. They rely on confusion. Self-awareness clears the fog. The end of deception doesn't come from calling out the liar. It comes from removing the part of yourself that needed the lie to feel secure. Self-understanding breaks every chain, quietly, permanently. Most people don't realize that deception always mirrors what they ignore in themselves. It's never random. The liar's success depends on how disconnected you are from your truth. If you crave validation, they'll give you attention. If you fear abandonment, they'll promise permanence. If you struggle with guilt, they'll disguise manipulation as care. Understanding yourself exposes every entry point. You begin to see how the same tricks repeat because the same wounds remain open. Once those wounds close, deception starves. The liar doesn't vanish, but their words lose flavor. They can still talk, but you stop tasting the bait. That's what awareness feels like. No resistance, no reaction, just recognition. You start reading intention faster than expression. Every attempt to deceive feels transparent. When you finally know what you want and what you won't allow, deception becomes powerless. The end doesn't come through confrontation, it comes through clarity. The greatest shift happens the day you stop expecting honesty from confusion. You once thought truth was something others gave, but now you see it's something you carry. The more you understand your motives, the less external voices can manipulate them. When someone tries to twist your reality, you notice instantly because it doesn't match your internal compass. That's what makes understanding yourself so dangerous to liars. You no longer seek direction outside of awareness. You begin to see how most deception doesn't require lies, it only needs your blindness. Once you start seeing clearly, the mask loses its magic. Those who built power through illusion become exposed by their predictability. You don't even need to speak, the energy shifts automatically. Every word they use rebounds against the wall of your self-awareness. The game collapses without confrontation because truth doesn't argue. It simply outlasts performance. Deception feeds on reaction. That's why manipulators study your emotions. They don't attack your logic, they exploit your feelings. When you understand yourself deeply, emotion becomes your ally, not your weakness. You start recognizing emotional triggers before they're used against you. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of defending, you listen. That's when you start seeing how predictable deception really is. It's never creative. It just recycles your fears in different words. Understanding yourself changes everything about the dynamic. It makes you unreadable to those who depend on controlling your state. That unreadability terrifies them because it means their influence has expired. The moment you stop being emotionally accessible to manipulation, power returns to you. And the irony is beautiful. What once overwhelmed you now amuses you. You see through it all without needing revenge. Understanding yourself becomes silent armor, unbreakable, invisible, undeniable. Every deceiver counts on one thing: your desire to see good in them. It's the kind of optimism that blinds the intelligent and exhausts the kind-hearted. The end of deception begins when you finally accept that good intentions don't excuse harmful behavior. Self-understanding teaches you that compassion without discernment is self-betrayal. You start realizing that not everyone lies out of malice. Some lie out of fear, others out of habit. But understanding that doesn't mean tolerating it. Once you learn your own thresholds, you stop negotiating your peace for empathy. The manipulator senses the shift, the tone changes, the access closes. You no longer confuse forgiveness with return. That's when they start unraveling. Because deception only works on those desperate to justify it. Awareness removes that desperation. You still care, but you don't enable. You still see potential, but you no longer sacrifice yourself for it. Understanding yourself changes the pace of life. You no longer rush to prove, to explain, or to fix. Every lie that used to break you now becomes information. You read situations instead of reacting to them. That's where your power started to grow, quietly, through observation. You began to see that lies were never personal. They were projections. When people live disconnected from truth, they need mirrors to sustain their illusions. You just stopped volunteering to be one. That decision shifted everything. The manipulator lost confidence because their tactics no longer created emotional chaos. Lies need energy to survive, indifference starves them. Once you know your worth, you stop feeding every narrative that questions it. You don't need to convince anyone of your truth. Understanding yourself is liberation disguised as detachment. The less you defend, the stronger you appear. The less you explain, the louder truth becomes. Awareness rewires the mind. You stop being addicted to potential and start being loyal to evidence. That's where deception ends, at the line between what's said and what's done. The person who understands themselves no longer confuses words with consistency. You watch patterns instead of promises. You listen for silence instead of excuses. The manipulator feels that loss of access and begins to panic. The power they once had came from your belief in their mask. When that belief dies, so does their illusion. Understanding yourself turns you into a mirror that doesn't distort. You reflect people back to themselves, and that terrifies those who live dishonestly. Awareness becomes a filter. Everything that's fake falls away naturally. The end of deception isn't dramatic, it's quiet and precise. You don't burn bridges, you just stop walking toward them. The truth doesn't chase, it waits. And liars can't survive that patience. There's always a moment when silence becomes your weapon. Understanding yourself teaches that not every truth needs to be spoken. Some are better lived. The people who deceived you once depended on your emotional reactions to confirm their power. Now, your stillness confuses them. You respond with calm that doesn't invite argument. You no longer defend what doesn't need defense. That's where deception collapses. When it runs out of places to hide, lies depend on your participation. When you withdraw, they echo into emptiness. The silence that follows becomes reflection, and reflection is torture for those who avoid accountability. You learn that truth doesn't require confrontation, it only requires consistency. The liar always exposes themselves in time, but only the self-aware have the patience to wait. That's why calm is feared. It's the end of manipulation disguised as peace. Understanding yourself turns patience into precision. The path to self-understanding is uncomfortable. It requires admitting how often you ignored your intuition, how frequently you traded clarity for connection. But that pain becomes foundation. The more you confront your blind spots, the fewer entry points deception can find. You stop giving people what you want to believe they are, and start seeing what they actually show. That's the difference between awareness and denial. You don't need to label anyone as villain or victim anymore. You just recognize behavior for what it is. Self-understanding gives you the strength to walk away without resentment. The manipulator can no longer use guilt to keep you in the loop. The moment you outgrow emotional dependence, their control ends. That's not revenge, it's evolution. Understanding yourself replaces heartbreak with perspective, pain with pattern, confusion with closure. And in that evolution, truth becomes quiet, sharp, and absolute. Self-awareness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, dismantling illusions one truth at a time. Before it appears, life feels foggy. Every lie sounds reasonable. Every manipulation feels justifiable. You defend what hurts you because you don't yet recognize the disguise. But once awareness awakens, everything shifts. The same words that once charmed begin to sound rehearsed. The same gestures that once soothed now feel staged. Awareness burns through illusion like sunlight through mist. It doesn't argue, it simply reveals. Lies depend on confusion to thrive, and confusion dies under observation. When the mind learns to question its own emotions, deceit loses grip. That's how power changes hands, not through confrontation, but through realization. The manipulator fears awareness more than exposure because awareness makes control impossible. It replaces reaction with reflection. Once awareness steps in, every lie begins to suffocate under its own weight. There was a time when words could bend perception. You believed sincerity because you needed to. You trusted tone more than consistency. That's how deception works. It feeds on hope, not logic. But awareness doesn't negotiate with hope. It measures behavior. It starts noticing what was always there. The patterns between words, the timing of affection, the rhythm of absence. The moment you see these things clearly, the spell breaks. Lies require participation, and awareness withdraws consent. Once you understand motive, manipulation becomes laughable. The beauty of awakening lies in how quiet it is. No explosions, no confrontations, just quiet recognition. You no longer need proof because your intuition, sharpened by pain, becomes undeniable. Lies collapse under their own contradictions when met with observation instead of emotion. That's why the deceptive fear your silence. It doesn't mean defeat, it means discernment, and discernment is lethal to illusion. Lies survive in the shadows of self-doubt. They thrive where you question your own perception, where you mistake manipulation for misunderstanding. That's why awareness feels like rebellion. It returns ownership of your mind. Once you stop outsourcing truth to someone else's version of it, you start seeing things as they are, not as they're presented. Every emotional hook loses tension. The words that once pierced now feel hollow. Deception feeds on confusion, and awareness starves it. You no longer respond to guilt disguised as care or pity masquerading as love. Awareness makes you immune to emotional theatrics. The liar loses rhythm because your silence no longer fits the script. That's what breaks them, not exposure, but irrelevance. Awareness doesn't destroy people, it just rearranges power. And when power shifts to the conscious, deceit has nowhere left to hide. Truth doesn't need defense when perception sees clearly. There's a unique clarity that comes after betrayal, the kind that rewires perception permanently. Before awareness, lies sound poetic. After awareness, they sound desperate. What once felt convincing now feels forced. That's what makes awakening so powerful. It doesn't just reveal others, it reveals yourself. You see where your need for approval blinded you, where your kindness enabled deceit, where your fear of conflict made you complicit. Awareness doesn't just kill external lies, it burns internal ones too. That's the real transformation. Once you start taking accountability for your patterns, deception stops finding entry. You become too grounded to be seduced by performance. The manipulator senses that energy shift. Their usual tactics fall flat. They used to control the narrative, but awareness rewrote the script. Lies can't survive where self-respect begins to grow. Awareness doesn't just expose, it evolves. It doesn't seek revenge, it builds immunity. What awareness teaches is simplicity. Deception is complicated. It relies on layers, manipulation, distraction. Truth, however, stands still. The mind that sees clearly no longer needs constant reassurance. You stop asking for closure because you recognize cycles. You stop demanding honesty from the dishonest because you see their limitation. That's the subtle brilliance of awareness. It saves you from the exhaustion of trying to fix what benefits from being broken. Once you detach emotionally, the liar loses control. Their charm, their guilt, their anger, none of it lands. They begin to panic because your perception no longer bends. Awareness turns their manipulation into transparency. Every tactic becomes obvious, every false apology predictable. Lies can't survive under a steady gaze. When truth becomes internalized, it radiates outward. And in that glow, deceit dissolves, not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. The game ends when the audience stops believing. Self-awareness is a mirror that no liar wants to face. It reflects the part of them they work hardest to hide. When you stop reacting emotionally, they lose script. The silence that follows is their exposure. You no longer provide distraction from their emptiness. That's the true punishment, not shouting, not revenge, but reflection. Awareness doesn't humiliate, it reveals. Those who build their power on illusion can't handle visibility. Every word they speak begins to betray them. Every action reveals motive. You no longer need to expose them because their behavior does it naturally. That's what makes awareness feel dangerous. It turns time into an ally. Truth doesn't need force, it only needs patience. Once awareness enters the room, deceit begins to decay. There's nothing to argue, nothing to fix, only the slow unraveling of lies under the weight of their own contradiction. The most unsettling thing about awareness is how irreversible it feels. Once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending ignorance. The world looks different, cleaner, sharper, less forgiving. Deception that once went unnoticed now screams for attention. You begin to see the mechanics behind manipulation, the pattern behind charm, the timing behind guilt. Awareness is sight, and sight makes control impossible. The liar feels it first. The loss of access, the absence of confusion. You're no longer pliable, no longer emotionally available for exploitation. Awareness doesn't seek to punish. It seeks to understand. But in understanding, it kills illusion. Lies lose oxygen when truth stops reacting. You stop fighting shadows and start observing them until they fade. It's not revenge, it's realization. The most powerful people aren't those who expose lies, they're those who outgrow them completely. There's freedom in finally trusting your own perception. Before, doubt ruled every decision. You second-guessed instincts, softened boundaries, forgave patterns. Awareness silenced that noise. It reminded you that intuition is data collected by the subconscious long before logic catches up. Once you honor that, deception stops working. You begin to sense dishonesty through energy, tone, even silence. You no longer fall for performances because you see the tension behind them. That's what liars fear most. not being confronted, but being understood too deeply. Like watching a wave crash against a cliff, again and again, until the water realizes it's not the rock that's going to yield. You see, while they were busy constructing their paper castles of superiority, you were quietly becoming titanium, unbreakable, unbendable, and utterly devastating to their delicate sense of self. Watch how they crumble when their usual tactics bounce off your newfound resilience. The subtle jabs that once pierced your armor now feel like feathers against steel. Their carefully crafted insults dissolve into meaningless noise. Their attempts at manipulation become almost comically transparent. It's like watching a child with a plastic sword trying to fence with a seasoned warrior, adorable in its futility, tragic in its desperation. The beautiful chaos unfolds when they realize their power was always borrowed from your reactions. Each time their ego inflated, it was supported by the scaffolding of your self-doubt. But now they're facing someone who has transformed their scars into armor, their pain into power. Every attempt they make to diminish you only highlights the pathetic fragility of their own facade. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare, where the student has finally surpassed the master. Your resilience becomes their mirror, reflecting back all the weaknesses they've tried so desperately to hide. See how they squirm when their projected insecurities bounce back at them? How they frantically try to reassert control when their usual arsenal of emotional weapons proves useless. It's like watching a magician's tricks fall flat when the audience can finally see all the strings. The desperation in their eyes grows with each failed attempt to regain their imagined supremacy. The comedy reaches its peak when they try to gather their allies, their flying monkeys, their echo chamber of validation, only to find that your resilience has created cracks in their carefully constructed reality. Those who once validated their every move now start to question, to doubt, to see through the emperor's new clothes. Their fragile ego can't handle the sudden exposure, the raw vulnerability of being seen for what they truly are. Notice the increasing desperation in their attempts to prove their superiority. Like a drowning person, thrashing in calm waters, they create chaos in an attempt to regain control. But your stillness, your unshakable core, becomes the evidence of their weakness. Each dramatic display, each grandiose gesture, each desperate attempt to reassert dominance only serves to highlight the contrast between their fragility and your strength. The true masterpiece lies in how little effort it takes on your part now. Your mere existence, your continued success, your quiet confidence. These become unbearable provocations to their paper-thin ego. You don't need to fight back anymore. Your resilience does all the heavy lifting. It's psychological warfare turned art form, where your opponent defeats themselves against the walls of your indifference. Their downward spiral accelerates as they realize they've lost their power to affect you. Watch how they cycle through their entire playbook of manipulation. The guilt trips that no longer work, the threats that no longer frighten, the love bombing that no longer blinds. Each failed strategy adds another crack to their already fractured sense of self, and the desperation begins to seep through like water through a breaking dam. The exquisite irony reaches its climax when they finally understand that their greatest fear has come true. They've become irrelevant, not through any grand gesture of defiance from you, but through the simple, unstoppable force of your resilience. Their ego, so dependent on controlling and diminishing others, cannot compute a reality where their target has become untouchable through growth rather than distance. Beneath the veneer of confidence, their kingdom of self-importance teeters on matchstick foundations. One breath of truth, and the whole charade threatens to collapse. Raw authenticity burns them like acid, eating through their carefully constructed masks. They scurry to patch the holes, desperate to maintain the illusion. But the decay has already set in. Somewhere in the labyrinth of their mind, a war rages between what they show and who they are. Empty praise echoes through gilded halls, while truth sits abandoned in the dungeon below. Yet still they dance, pirouetting from one performance to another, terrified of the moment the music stops. Cracks appear first, in the quiet moments, those dangerous spaces between staged photographs and rehearsed speeches. You can see it in their eyes then, the hunger that no amount of shallow admiration can satisfy. It devours them from within. Within their court of sycophants and yes men, they reign supreme. But place them before the mirror of genuine connection, and watch how quickly their crown slips, soft, twisted laughter emerges. Blind spots stretch for miles in the kingdom of their ego. Behind diamond-studded mirrors and gold-plated excuses, they've constructed a fortress where their flaws vanish into convenient shadows, while yours are magnified under spotlights of their creation. Such a fascinating display of psychological acrobatics, watching them twist reality until it suits their narrative. Through cracked lenses of superiority, they dissect your every move. A simple mistake becomes your defining characteristic, while their catastrophic failures dissolve into learning experiences. In their distorted theater, your stumble is a fall from grace, but their complete collapse, merely a momentary setback, darling. Yesterday's coffee stain on your shirt becomes today's evidence of your complete incompetence. Yet they stroll through life leaving chaos in their wake, draped in designer excuses that mask the stench of their own shortcomings. Each criticism they hurl your way is a smokescreen, concealing mountains of their own inadequacies behind clouds of projected judgment. Something primal stirs in the depths of their denial. With reptilian precision, they strike at your smallest insecurities, while remaining comically oblivious to their glaring defects. Their ego performs magnificent contortions, bending reality, stretching truth, twisting perception until their world resembles a carnival funhouse, where every mirror flatters their reflection while warping yours. Dancing through life in a bubble of their own creation, they float above the consequences of their actions. Responsibility slides off them like water from oiled feathers, while they meticulously document your every misstep in their mental ledger of grievances. Their selective vision would be impressive if it weren't so pathologically ridiculous. Hypocrisy flows through their veins like expensive wine, sweet on their tongue, but bitter in the aftermath. They toast to their imagined perfection, while listing your flaws, like sommelier describing vintage failures. Each sip of self-deception makes the next one easier to swallow, until they're drunk on their own illusions. Beneath starlit skies of their grandeur, reality becomes a distant memory. Your growth threatens their carefully constructed narrative. Each achievement you unlock spotlights the padlocks on their own potential. Still, they persist in their performance, conducting symphonies of criticism while remaining deaf to their own discordant notes. Venom drips from silver tongues as they spin tales of your inadequacy. Yet in quiet moments, When masks slip and guards lower, glimpses of terror flash across their features. Moments of clarity quickly buried under fresh avalanches of denial. Their greatest fear? The mirror might turn inward, reflecting truths they've spent lifetimes avoiding. Sacred temples of self-deception crumble brick by brick when confronted with authentic success. As you rise, their illusions fall, each step of your progress eroding the foundations of their carefully constructed reality. Watching them scramble to maintain their narrative becomes a masterclass in desperate preservation. Relationships die in whispers beneath swollen egos. Each unspoken truth, every swallowed word, adds another brick to the wall between hearts. Picture a garden where one plant grows so large it blocks the sunlight from everything else. That's what an inflated ego does. It spreads its roots, steals all nutrients, kills every other living thing around it, until only its twisted form remains. Resentment seeps through relationship cracks like black ink in clear water. When one person's ego demands constant feeding, the other starves for attention, understanding, and basic respect. Simple conversations transform into battlegrounds, where admitting mistakes becomes surrender, and saying sorry feels like defeat. The relationship slowly drowns in unspoken words and unexpressed feelings. Down in trenches of daily life, their ego plays general while your needs serve as cannon fodder. Morning coffee becomes Cold War territory. They forgot to buy milk again, but somehow it's your fault for not reminding them. Last week's dinner plans? Canceled because their day was obviously more stressful than yours. The pattern repeats until breathing the same air feels like suffocation. Air grows thick with things unsaid. Remember how you used to share dreams over midnight snacks? Now you choke on pride served at breakfast. Their achievements demand standing ovations, while yours get shuffled under rugs. Days blur into months as you learn to speak in careful whispers, walking on eggshells that once were foundations of trust. Inside the tornado of their self-importance, love gasps for oxygen. Simple joys shrivel under constant criticism. Date nights become stages for their monologues, your stories interrupted, your experiences diminished. The warmth that once flowed between two hearts now freezes in the shadow of one person's endless winter. Silent screams echo through hollow conversations. How was your day? Becomes a cue for their three-act drama, while your struggles stay locked behind gritted teeth. Balance tips further with each passing sunset. Their problems are emergencies. Yours are overreactions. The relationship's pulse grows weaker under the weight of their constant need for validation. Poison drips slowly from ego's fangs into love's veins. Arguments never end in understanding anymore. They end when they win. Compromise becomes myth. Empathy turns to legend. And somewhere between their first and last word, the dream of us fades into nightmare of them. Each day adds another drop until the cup of patience overflows. Dancing alone at a party for two, you watch them twirl with their reflection. Remember when partnership meant growing together? Now, growth threatens their spotlight. Every step forward you take pushes them into frenzied loops of self-promotion. The music of mutual support dies under the loud drums of their insecurity. Fire dies where ego floods. Little death by little death. The flame that once lit two hearts dims under waves of me, myself, and I. Intimacy drowns in pools of pride. Vulnerability rusts in rains of ridicule. The garden you planted together withers as their ego's shadow grows longer, darker, colder. Silent gardens wither where ego blooms too large. Love needs space to grow, air to breathe, soil to root. But ego devours everything, leaving only concrete demands and marble monuments to itself. You've seen it, haven't you? Those relationships where one person's need for praise swallows every moment whole. Between heartbeats and hollow praise, connections snap like autumn leaves. Simple moments shatter under ego's weight. Morning coffee becomes audience time. Dinner conversations transform into one-person shows. Remember when sharing meant giving? Now it's just taking, always taking, until the well of genuine feeling runs dry. Empty words bounce off bedroom walls each night. I love you morphs into love how you make me look. Kisses taste like demands. Hugs feel like contracts. What started as a dance for two becomes a spotlight performance for one, while the other sits in darkness, applauding on cue. Their hunger for validation grows teeth, biting chunks from every tender moment. Deep beneath surface smiles, authenticity drowns in needs never met. They collect compliments like trophies, stack validations like gold bars, yet stay poor in real connection. Sweet nothings turn bitter when they're only flowing one way. Yesterday's, "How are you?" becomes today's, "Let me tell you about me." Tomorrow fades into silence. Storm clouds gather in corners of shared spaces. Each room holds ghosts of conversations that could have been if ego hadn't grabbed the mic again. Their spotlight burns so bright, it casts everyone else in shadow. Even the walls seem tired of reflecting their endless self-promotion. Touch turns cold when hands only reach for applause. Bedroom mirrors crack under weight of unmet eyes, as intimacy freezes in winter of constant performance. They've forgotten how warmth feels between two hearts, beating as one, too busy conducting their own parade to notice love slipping through frozen fingers. Dust gathers on untold stories while their chapters fill every page. Your dreams, footnotes in their epic saga. Your pain, intermission in their grand drama. The relationship's pulse grows weaker with each missed connection, each overlooked moment. Each time genuine feeling bows before ego's throne. Beyond curtains of constant praise-seeking, reality writes its own script. Genuine bonds rust in rains of neglect, while they polish their image to blinding shine. Love language becomes foreign beneath avalanche of me, mine, more. Their need for validation builds walls so high even sunlight struggles to peek through. Time reveals truth in slow motion scenes, how ego ate away foundations like acid on stone. Sweet beginnings sour when one heart demands stage time, while the other sits in audience, holding tickets to a show they never wanted to watch. Connection dies not in grand explosions, but in quiet moments of unmet needs. Peace crumbles beneath feet that always need to stand on higher ground. Sunday mornings turn to war zones over misremembered movie quotes or disputed dinner dates. Their need to win poisons morning coffee, stains evening wine, turns shared meals into cold serving of "I told you so." Simple joys die on hills they chose to die on. Happiness slips through fingers too busy pointing blame. They collect receipts like precious gems, store screenshots like ammunition, build archives of other people's wrongs, while their own joy gathers dust in forgotten corners. Each "I was right" adds another brick to walls keeping love out, until they live in fortresses of hollow victories. Sweet moments shatter against sharp edges of their need to never be wrong. Birthday celebrations freeze mid-song when someone misquotes statistics. Family dinners collapse under weight of corrected grammar. Watch how quickly laughter dies when they enter rooms, armed with actually, and technically, weapons mass, destruction of joy. Inside minds wired for winning, Happiness stands no chance against rightness. They measure life in points scored, arguments won, corrections made. Scorecards replace photo albums, debate victories substitute for genuine connection. While others dance in rain, they stand dry and write, counting droplets to prove weather reports wrong. Beneath mountains of evidence supporting their views, buried dreams whisper of what could have been. Date nights turn to debate clubs. Love letters become legal briefs. Pillow talk transforms into cross-examination. They're so busy building cases they miss moments' magic, slipping through courtroom cracks. Rising suns paint shadows of choices made. Warmth of shared laughter sacrificed for cold comfort of being right. Simple disagreements grow thorns. Casual conversations become minefields. They stand guard over facts while feelings wither, defend positions while possibilities die, choose rightness while rightness chooses loneliness. Time writes stories in empty spaces where joy could have lived. Each correction costs a smile. Every argument wins them another lonely night. They've mastered art of being right, but forgotten rhythm of being happy. Their trophy room gleams with victories, while their heart rusts from lack of use. Daylight finds them counting. Wins in empty rooms. Medals of correctness hang heavy round necks, bent from weight of missing warmth. They've won every battle but lost war against loneliness. Proved every point, except one that mattered. That being right means nothing when you're right alone. Smoke and mirrors fill rooms where ego runs the show. Behind designer curtains and practiced smiles, reality blurs into fantasy. You fall for the performance. Their carefully crafted charm, rehearsed romance, perfectly timed tenderness. Sweet poison served in golden cups while truth hides backstage. Dancing with ghosts becomes your new normal. Each step follows scripts they've written. Every kiss plays out like scenes they've directed. Their ego paints pretty pictures of perfect love, hangs them in galleries of grand gestures and empty promises. You learn to love the painting while the artist vanishes behind canvas. Sunlight catches dust on props they use to build their stage. Remember those spontaneous gifts that matched their mood swings? The grand apologies that never changed behaviors? Roses bloom and die by their schedule. Romance flows when audience watches. Love exists only in spotlights they control. Between acts of their endless performance, reality whispers warnings. Late-night conversations reveal plot holes in their story. Quiet moments expose cracks in their character. But you've learned your lines too well, praising the emperor's new clothes while watching naked truth parade past windows. Circus music drowns out heartbeats as you play your part. Jump through hoops for their approval. Walk tightropes of their expectations. Swing from trapeze to trapeze of their changing moods. The crowd cheers, but you've forgotten how solid ground feels beneath honest feet. Beneath makeup of manipulation, true faces fade like old photographs. You chase shadows of promises down halls of their creation, loving echoes instead of voices, embracing reflections instead of reality. Their ego builds labyrinths where love loses its way, leaving breadcrumb trails that lead nowhere. Time peels paint from perfect pictures they've hung in your heart. Morning light reveals stage props where you thought treasures stood. Their grand gestures shrink in daylight. Romantic scripts sound hollow without special effects. You realize you've been kissing mirages while real love waited in wings. Empty spaces echo with memories of scenes they staged. Each room holds ghosts of moments that looked real through ego's lens. Candle-lit dinners that served control for dessert. Surprise parties that celebrated their image, not your joy. Love letters read like press releases now. Beyond curtains of their creation, truth writes its own story. Pages fill with scenes they couldn't script. Genuine tears that ruined their perfect plot. Raw emotions that didn't fit their narrative. Real love that threatened their carefully constructed illusion. Dawn breaks through fantasy's fog as you finally see through their production, leaving them speechless on their empty stage because their fragile ego couldn't handle your resilience to their illusion.